It's time for another movie. The first story. The last movie. The GT movie. Very much not the GT movie. It's a mess of contradictions and complications in Dragon Ball Dissection. Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy holidays to those who don't celebrate it. Christmas is one of my favorite holidays, which is why I've always scheduled Dragon Ball Dissection December around it. Even before there was a Dragon Ball Dissection December, there was a Dragon Ball Dissection Christmas episode. It's why the video that falls on Christmas Day always ends up with a special place in my heart. Even on occasions I've struggled to find a place in my heart for the content I'm reviewing. I've never quite managed to pinpoint my own relationship to Saikyo Eino Michi or The Path to Ultimate Strength, and maybe that's fitting because it wears so many hats. The movie premiered on March 4th, 1996, in between the 4th and 5th episodes of Dragon Ball GT. GT's next episode previews promoted it. It very much falls into the same vein of Toei Festival released movies that we've covered up to this point. In a lot of ways we'll get into, it is essentially the Dragon Ball GT movie. But at the same time, it's very much not. It's considered the 10th anniversary movie. While the Dragon Ball franchise as a whole was over 11 years old at this point, the release of this movie nearly perfectly coincides with the 10th anniversary of the first episode of the animated Dragon Ball adaptation. Because of that, rather than adapting or parodying what's hot and new, this movie serves as another retelling of the origins of Dragon Ball. It carries the Dragon Ball branding rather than Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball GT. It serves as another new beginning, bookending it with the very first Dragon Ball movie, which did the exact same thing. On the flip side, this 17th film would prove to be the final entry of the original animated run, ending a 10-year streak. Toei wouldn't produce another animated theatrical Dragon Ball film for 17 years. Like I said, this movie is a lot of different things. Since this is a video, I might as well address what you can see. In addition to its release and promotion connecting it to GT, the aesthetics of The Path to Ultimate Strength tie it to that era of Dragon Ball more tightly than any other aspect. The movie makes no attempt to reproduce Toriyama's chubby and round art style of the 1980s. Were it not for the ages of the characters, these designs could have been plucked right out of Dragon Ball GT. They're angular, slightly more proportional, more shaded, and very, very shiny. And since Goku is a kid in Dragon Ball GT, the only real visual difference between the two is that this Goku has a tail. As if to drive that point home, Goku wastes next to no time changing out of the gi he wore at the beginning of Dragon Ball, spending the rest of the movie in his Dragon Ball GT outfit. This movie makes no effort to hide when it was made. Interestingly though, it bucks the animated trend of coloring Bluma's hair blue. Instead, this goes with the Toriyama purple. Personally, I prefer the older art style, particularly for this part of the story. That's why I still think The Legend of Shenlong is the best the first story arc has ever looked in animation. Even though it's not my favorite art style, I like the idea of recreating early Dragon Ball in a late Dragon Ball style. And my personal preferences aside, I can't deny this movie looks good. More than any other of the original 17 films, this one feels like a real movie. It uses stylistic techniques like rack focus, 360 camera moves, words jumping off the page, sketched out dinosaurs flying into the camera. And to a certain extent, it takes its time for dialogue and character moments, which is something it can do slightly better with its nearly 80-minute runtime. For most movies, that's pretty breezy, but for a Dragon Ball movie, it's gone with the wind. Musically, this movie also shows off its late 90s pedigree. The fact that this is musically GT becomes obvious given how many cues are an instrumental of GT's first ending theme, Hitori Janai, and that its ending theme is straight up GT's opening theme, Dan Dan Kokoro Hikare Teku. I haven't had a chance to talk about it yet, but for Dragon Ball GT, Kikuchi Shunsuke stepped down, and Tokunaga Akihito stepped in. This being essentially the Dragon Ball GT movie, he scored this as well. And despite his relative lack of experience with the franchise, he does a fantastic job, even better than his compositions for GT up to this point. There's definitely a cinematic quality to this that at the same time captures that old-fashioned kung fu movie vibe that Dragon Ball music has always gone for. Then again, it also throws in a few rock guitar pieces that feel especially out of place. Like how Kikuchi's pieces for the Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z movies would be reused for their series, a lot of the best pieces from this movie will eventually wind up in Dragon Ball GT, and I'm glad they are. Getting this cast back together is a real treat. Tsuru Hiromi has been playing Bluma as a middle-aged lady at this point in the series, but she effortlessly jumps back into playing a 16-year-old. Nozawa Masako is so adorable as a young Goku, and it's amazing how differently she plays this compared to Goku in a kid's body in GT. Actors who had moved on to other Dragon Ball roles return to where they began. Watanabe Naoko goes back to Puar, Gordy Daisuke returns to the Sea Turtle. Surprisingly though, Furukawa Toshio does not reprise his role as Blue. Instead, Shimada Bin, Broly's voice actor, takes over. We get the last of our revolving Kame Sennings in this movie, as he's now played by Aikawa Kinya. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the performance. It's very different from any other iteration of the character. But I do really like the voice. It comes across as naturally warm and elderly. I don't think I would have minded if he had been chosen to voice the character permanently. Alas, this was his only time in the role. That's enough with the AV stuff, let's talk about the story. We've covered the first arc on Dragon Ball Dissection 3 times now, so I think you should know the basics already. After so many Dragon Ball Z movies featuring plots that are just about finding an excuse to fight, this feels like a breath of fresh air. Matsui Aya had replaced Koyama Takao as head writer going into Dragon Ball GT, which means she writes this movie as well. As I said, this attempts to retell the first story arc of Dragon Ball, and I feel like that often runs into certain problems. Obviously, telling the first story is the most obvious place to go for a standalone adaptation. It's the beginning. There is no prerequisite baggage or continuity to have to get across to the audience. It's simple. Unlike most other Dragon Ball story arcs, it's easy to jump in here without losing anybody. But at the same time, the first story arc is not exactly representative of what Dragon Ball came to be. It's certainly not representative of what most fans seem to come to Dragon Ball for. This arc is missing a lot of the action and a lot of the characters that define Dragon Ball for a lot of people. This movie tries to split the difference by combining the first story arc with the Red Ribbon Army arc. At first glance, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. After all, that's another one of those unpopular adventure-focused stories. However, it does provide the movie with a central antagonist, which the manga version of the Hunt for the Dragon Balls arc lacks. The army can be tweaked to be threatening and provide enough of a backdrop to create the kind of scenery-destroying epic final battle scenes Dragon Ball is known for. Hachan is the same friendly robot he's always been, but now he strangles people and can fly with some sort of rocket thrust that's placed in such a way that it ends up looking like he's blasting ass. But he can also be violently crushed to death in a sacrifice that inspires Goku to find the power he never knew he had and save the day. Just as I argued that number 16 was basically a replacement for number 8 has now become the replacement number 16. Everything comes full circle. This movie severely powers up Goku for the sake of the eye candy. Rather than his first Kamehameha knocking the wheels off of a car, it seemingly takes out most of Blue's flotilla of ships. And Hachan's death causes him to emit a melodramatic aura that reaches to the heavens. Even this beginning of Dragon Ball movie has to have its Super Saiyan moment. That's essentially what this is, and with all the bending it's doing to accommodate the kinds of emotional beats later Dragon Ball would have, I'm honestly amazed they didn't just go for it and literally make this a Super Saiyan transformation. I mean, why not? But I have to admire their restraint, as practically non-existent as it is. Basically, this movie tries to be all parts of Dragon Ball for everybody. Unfortunately, that means we once again run into the same problem the very first Dragon Ball movie had. Despite its longer runtime, many of the elements taken from the first story arc feel very, very rushed. Given how much time it's sharing with things like Muscle Tower and Goku storming the Red Ribbon compound, it's really no surprise. But it is disappointing. I praised the third Dragon Ball movie, Mystical Great Adventure, for economizing Dragon Ball's themes, characters, and storylines into a short runtime by basically writing an entirely new premise to put them in. Unfortunately, this movie does not learn from that example, instead keeping its storylines intact and then awkwardly stitching them together. Like in the original storyline, Goku, Bluma, and Oolong team up to look for the Dragon Balls. This time, however, they run into one at Muscle Tower because this is also the Red Ribbon Army arc. Because characters like Bluma, Oolong, Yamcha, and Puar didn't have a role during Muscle Tower originally, the story can't think of anything for them to do here and just abandons them. It's only after Goku fights Metallic and Hachan and White do those characters show back up in the movie. Because of its split focus, the movie keeps picking up new characters in rapid succession, only for them to have nothing else to do after they're introduced. The only exception to this is Hachan, who befriends Goku and immediately exits the story so we can return to hunt for the Dragon Ball's plot points. Then he randomly returns at the 11th hour to help out in Goku's final battle against Black. And since we've now tag-teamed story arcs again, that means that Bluma, Yamcha, Oolong Puar, Kame Sennin, and Umigame have nothing to do but stand on the sidelines and watch. By the end, it seems like the movie has at least become aware of this imbalance and makes a joke about it. The fight seems to be over. This dirty half-dozen stupidly think they can re-enter the story. Black's mech suit suddenly reappears. They run back to the sidelines. Nope. It's not time for you guys to be relevant yet. Get back in the corner. We'll let you know when you matter. All of the characters suffer from this to varying degrees, but the two who definitely get the shortest end of the stick are Yamcha and Puar. As you hopefully remember, the role of Yamcha and Puar in the original story is to follow Goku and the others from a distance, helping them out discreetly on their quest for the Dragon Balls, so they can ultimately steal them at the last minute. Instead, they end up allying with the heroes when a mutual threat comes into the picture. You'd think by using the Red Ribbon Army they could pull off those same beats here. After all, the first movie managed to do so with the common threat of King Gudumez. Unfortunately, adding Hachan and Kame Sennin into the second and third acts renders Yamcha redundant as another fighter. Oolong already makes Puar redundant. There's a scene where the characters are captured by the Red Ribbon Army, and everyone yells at Oolong as he unsuccessfully tries to transform into a key. Puar yells at him, "Dude, you can transform into a key." The movie has already gone to the trouble, for some reason, of setting up their shared backstory at the Southern Transformation Kindergarten. But Puar never transforms a single time in this entire movie. Just like the first movie, Yamcha and Puar are introduced in tandem with Oolong, which I thought was a bad idea then, and it's still a bad idea now. It's worse now, because right after that is when the movie starts adding in Red Ribbon elements, namely the Muscle Tower section that refuses to use these characters. So immediately after they enter the picture, they exit it. And I mean that literally. They actually bid us farewell because it's cold and they have to go hide in a cave. After Muscle Tower, the movie shifts focus to meeting Umigame and Kame Sennin. By the time Yamcha and Puar reappear at the beach, I'd honestly forgotten they were even part of this story. And it's only at this point they find out about the Dragon Balls. Why, then, have you been following them through 3 different biomes? Well, the movie tries to excuse this lack of motivation by having Yamcha say if he doesn't beat them up, he'll lose his reputation as a great desert bandit, which is pretty flimsy. Nobody saw your fight, nobody's going to care. This movie can't string these beats together properly, so they have to force Yamcha and Puar along for half the movie until it can figure out a compelling reason for them to even be there. At least for a moment you think this is all leading up to Yamcha getting a big damn hero moment when the rest of the characters are captured. However, Bluma gets all dewy-eyed over him and gives away the element of surprise. And I'd love that as a comedic moment if it didn't take away Yamcha's only potential justification for being here. I'd say he only exists as a payoff to Bluma's motivation of wishing for a boyfriend, but that's barely addressed. There's no reason anyone in the audience would be rooting for these characters to get together, and the two don't interact enough for anyone to buy that they'd want to get together. The way this story has been restructured, there is no role for Yamcha and Puar. It almost pains me to say it, because it's not like these two are getting anything else to do in 1996, but they really should have been cut out of the film. Quite frankly, Kame Sennin could have been cut as well, except that he needs to demonstrate the Kamehameha so Goku can use it. Poor dolts. And that is par for the course for so many elements of this movie. Important establishing lines of dialogue like Yamcha wanting to get married, Red wanting to get taller, and Kame Sennin having trained Goku's grandfather are just shuffled past so abruptly that they don't carry any emotional weight. Goku's fight with Metallic is rendered so incredibly brief, I don't know why they wasted time including it at all. Oh, but the movie knows to save time for the important things, Like the single most gratuitous panty shot in all of Dragon Ball. No, that isn't it. See, I can defend a lot of the cheesecake when it at least furthers plot or character or tells a joke. Please explain to me how that applies to this moment. Yamcha makes his first appearance by firing a rocket at the group. The camera decides to hold on this spot on the ground so that Bluma's crotch can fall into frame and we can see her exposed underwear. It's not so Yamcha can see it and get embarrassed. It's not so Goku can realize the differences in her anatomy. It's not even so Bluma can lament having worn a dress to a rocket fight. It's just so the little children in the audience get another chance to see her panties. What a bold, yet creepy and pointless choice. Anyway, Blue is skimmed over so much that we don't even see him in any detail until after Goku's already blown him up. Given that his meticulous appearance has traditionally been one of his defining character traits, that's a fairly glaring oversight. It'd be like only showing Zarbon transformed. It leaves the wrong impression. Another wrong impression is that for some reason Blue has been demoted for this movie. He's now referred to as a colonel instead of a general, which makes him a downgrade from General White. Yes, aside from Black, White is the Red Ribbon operative we spend the most time with, which is a shame because he's the most boring one. There's a cute moment where Red has Blue taken out to be executed and comments on how he loves the sound of it. It's cute if you recognize it as a callback to Blue's similar reaction to executions in the original series. But the problem is, like the haggard appearance, it takes away Blue's remaining character traits and reassigns them to someone else. He's another character that has been so marginalized, I wonder why he's even here. You might have noticed that the Red Ribbon characters have all received substantial redesigns for this movie. Those come straight from Toriyama himself. I don't know. They're fine, I guess. I don't think they were really necessary, especially since, let's say you have certain problems with Black's original design. It's not like these redesigns do anything to fix that. The ending is painfully rushed too. It's obviously aping how movie 3 concludes with Goku's wish to bring Bora back to life. It works there, it doesn't work here. That movie takes the time to wrap up its plot threads. Tenshinhan and Chaozu reconcile, the Mifan Empire is secure, all of our friends are reunited and safe, and the pacing takes time to build up suspense. Will dropping the last Dragon Ball in this crevice actually work? Even if the final scene leaves it ambiguous, the credits present a montage showing father and son together again. Goku flies off to new adventures. Here, I'll give it credit. Ending on Goku smiling so that we know Hachan has come back to life is a fine artistic choice in and of itself. We don't need to see it, we know it happened. But the movie does not solely turn on Hachan's fate. Most of the movie has been spent introducing these other characters who never even met Hachan. What's their deal? What are they going to do? Are they friends? Everyone's just left at this ruined battleground with no connection, no prospects, no motivations. And then, cut to credits. That could work for a much bleaker movie than this, but as much as I like Hachan and am moved by his sacrifice, I don't think he's enough to carry the ending of this film by himself. And in trying to do so, it once again lays bare how superfluous everybody else is and how unresolved their stories are. However, on the occasion this movie chooses to take its time, the resulting moments really shine. Goku and Bluma meeting is clearly intended to draw viewers in, and it does a fantastic job establishing the characters and setting up their dynamic without a hint of just trying to get on with it. There are great details like Goku repeatedly rolling snowballs because he's so enamored by the concept of snow, it takes the opportunity to let Goku and Hachan have a snowball fight. And I love the sequence where Goku, Bluma, and Oolong find a Dragon Ball in a field of flowers. It lingers on the experience just enough to drive in the point that this is magical. Moments like those make me wonder how good this movie could have been had it not overextended itself, not tried to be everything for everyone. And that's why this movie leaves me feeling underwhelmed. When it clicks, it's amazing, but when it doesn't, it's a rushed mess. I feel that I should like it more than I do. Every time I rewatch it, I hope I'll like it more, but always come away thinking it just missed the mark. As a 10th anniversary piece for longtime fans, It might succeed at reminding them of cherished memories, but I can't bring myself to recommend this as a quick launching point into Dragon Ball for new fans because I don't think it does its story or especially its characters much justice. To my utter shock, as terribly rushed as The Legend of Shenlong is, it still tells a more coherent story than this, and justifies the inclusion of most of its characters. And it does so with a runtime 30 minutes shorter. Sadly, The Path to Ultimate Strength is only superior in regards to its more cinematic direction and the rare occasions it actually stops to let the characters drive scenes. I'd recommend it over most of the Dragon Ball Z films, as it actually has a story to tell. It's ambitious, and I respect that. However, another story it tells is the story of the state of Dragon Ball at its release. Dragon Ball GT is situated as the present and future of the franchise at this point. However, there is no second movie for 1996, and there aren't any for 1997. GT never gets its own movie. Instead, what it gets is a movie firmly fixed on the past. I think more than anything, The Path to Ultimate Strength indicates that Dragon Ball is on its way out, and its best years are already behind it. Dragon Ball GT isn't the future. It's just biding time. And we're only 4 episodes in. Not a good sign. On that happy note, thanks so much for watching and for sharing Christmas Day with me. I'm always glad to get to spend it with all of you. There's a little bit of December left, which means there's still more Dragon Ball Dissection December. The last episode returns to Dragon Ball GT and will be out on New Year's Eve. As you probably guessed though, it's already out for $10 and up patrons. Whenever you watch it, I hope you enjoy it. See you there!